Hi everyone, my name is Ben Upham. This is the After Age, and today's video is called Why Cooperation Means Giving Up Your Truth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to give up your truth in a second, and whether you really do need to give up your truth for cooperation or not. Maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, but maybe not. But first, I realized that I probably need to talk about cooperation a little bit, because I think for a lot of folks, maybe cooperation isn't really something you want to give up anything for. Why is cooperation so important? What does it matter, cooperation? Well, hopefully you have learned at some point in your life, probably early in childhood, that cooperation is a good thing. You're supposed to share your toys, etc., etc. But as we grow older, cooperation can sometimes seem to be a substitute word for do what I say or else, and related oppressions of various kinds. So I want to remind you first about why cooperation is really, 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 really important. Okay, so cooperation. Cooperation is what makes the world go round. Cooperation is the bubble, the cloud, the pillow that everything good about your life floats on. Maybe not everything, but so much of it that you don't even really notice it most of the time. In fact, you probably take it for granted. Cooperation, or in other words, human beings working together to get things done, is what allows everything from democracy and freedom to, fast food to exist. We cooperate. That's how we built so much of what makes up the After Age, if you're familiar with that idea from these videos or the book, which you should read or watch, or just generally progress, if you prefer that term, equally valid. Those things, the things that make up our all the good stuff in the world today, all the things that we as human beings have achieved, all comes from people cooperating, from people working together to get things done. In fact, there is so much cooperation in the world that we tend to take it for granted and not even notice it. One of the reasons we don't notice it is because we are pretty good at it, actually, or I should say we're okay at it. That is, we've had so much practice at cooperation and frankly so much evolutionary pressure to be better at cooperating that we kind of just do it all the time naturally, and we don't even notice that, oh yeah, that thing you just did, that was actually cooperation. It's just it's the air we breathe in a sense. And the other reason that we take it for granted is because when people cooperate, or countries cooperate, or other groups of people of various kinds cooperate, it's not really worth noticing because it does happen all the time. So the things that we notice tend to be when we don't cooperate, right? Failures to cooperate are what make the news. And by the news, I mean both, the news, the world news, whatever you see in the newspaper or whatever, and also petty little shit, gossip, Twitter Scrabble, Twitter wars of various kinds. That's all, people not cooperating or disagreeing or conflict. Drama is another word for it. Those things draw our attention. So the stuff where we're just like, life is kind of just going on in its normal way, right? That's not news, obviously. There's nothing new there, but that is all cooperation. So if you want to know how much cooperation there is versus how much lack of cooperation there is in the world, the ratio is roughly the same as the amount of things that make the news versus the amount of things that don't make the news. So what makes the news is roughly how much non-cooperation there is in the world. And what doesn't make the news, i.e. most of what's going on, that's cooperation. That's how skewed the ratio is between how we don't cooperate and how we do cooperate. I don't want to oversell cooperation. It doesn't mean it's, singing kumbaya around the campfire or anything and all smiles and rainbows. It's not, but that's cooperation. It's just people kind of doing the human society dance, right? That's cooperation. So it's huge. It's very important. It also means that given how much of it there is, if you were to just increase it by just a little bit, increasing something that's massive by just a little bit gets you a whole lot more. So if we can just cooperate just a little bit better, there's huge benefits to that. I mean, if you think, like a 1% increase, like may not seem like a lot, but like 1%, that's the profit ratio for a lot of companies. It's like, it's like 99% cost and 1% that's your profit. But if your company is Amazon, then 1% of, $1 trillion in sales or however much Amazon makes, that's enough for like everybody to live high on the hog for a long time. And it's the same with cooperation. We can increase it just a little bit, massive benefits. So that's why cooperation is important. Yeah, if you didn't need that pep talk, I apologize. I realized, the title kind of assumed that people knew why cooperation was worth giving things up for. But now you know why. So having said all that, I have to add something else, which is that cooperation is very, very, very difficult. There are more difficult things, of course, depending on how you measure things that are difficult in the world. But I think as human beings, cooperation is probably the most difficult thing that we do on a regular basis. It really requires more of our intelligence and our willpower and our patience and our time than pretty much anything else we do. And it's not surprising that given all that it's so difficult. It's not like we're overlooking some obvious way to be more cooperative. Cooperation it's a loaded issue. As I said a little bit earlier, one person's cooperation is another person's exploitation, One person's like, yeah, it's just great. We're cooperating. I tell you what to do and you do it. This is perfect, right? So obviously for the other people, like that's not cooperation, right? You've enslaved me or whatever. And it's usually not that extreme. But anybody who's ever worked for somebody else and, felt like I wish I didn't have to get up and go into the freaking office today. Like that's, that moment. On one level, that it is cooperation, right? People are cooperating at a business to create a service or a product. Another level, it's like, I don't want to be here. This is not cooperation, whatever. So it's a double-edged sword. There's other ways in which cooperation is difficult. If you think about you cooperating as giving something, right? You're giving back in a sense. Maybe you're giving back money in the form of taxes, right? You're cooperating with your society and its government by donating or contributing part of your wealth to the commonwealth. So in that case, you might be giving your taxes back and then you're like, well, they're spending my money on some war I don't agree with or on people that I don't think should deserve this money or whatever. That's painful, right? I mean, man, I don't want to cooperate. If this is cooperation, I'm going to give you money and you're going to give it to some jackass or to bomb villages on the other side of the world. Like, this doesn't sound good to me. So that's another example of how cooperation can suck and not feel great. It's still cooperation, in my opinion. Some people might call it something else, but I would argue it is still kind of cooperation, and it is still kind of part of the same phenomenon that has given us all this great stuff. But again, it's controversial. Cooperation, in fact, gets to the root of who we are in a couple ways. Number one, I mean, it's been driving our evolution, our brains, for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Being better at cooperation is become a key requirement of being a Homo sapien, right? Cooperation has been driving our evolution for as long as there have been human beings. Actually, probably before there were Homo sapiens, before there were human beings. It is also this sort of root dilemma of who we are as individuals, right? If I'm an individual with my own wants and needs and desires, and then at the same time there is the society and the group that I live in, and which is more important, my own desires or those of the group in which I am a part of? And if, as you know, probably some wise man would tell you, well, they're both important. Which is more important in each situation, right? When should I be giving up my own desires for that of the group? And when should the group defer to what I want for myself? I mean, it's not an easy problem, right? There is no obvious solution to these things. We deal with this dilemma every day of our lives, in a sense. So cooperation is very, very difficult. It is not an easy street, but it is still very, very important. So it's very important and it's very difficult. It's the hardest thing we do. It's a pain in the ass. It can be exploitation. I'll run out of fingers before I get to how many different ways cooperation is complicated and tricky and burdensome. Yet, cooperation is so important. And more to the point, we don't really have a choice in the matter. The forces that we have unleashed through what I would call or refer to as the after age, but which, if you want, you could just call progress, or you could just say the last couple hundred years or so, these forces of science and technology and everything that comes from them are pushing us closer and closer together. Not just science and technology, also social changes around democracy and rights and the rule of law. These are pushing us together towards each other as a species, not just as individual countries, but as the entire planet in a sense. So we don't really have a choice at this point. Now we fight back. We scream and we yell and we claw at each other and at the vague forces that are pushing us together, because we don't want to have to cooperate any more than we're comfortable with. But at the end of the day, we are going to have to cooperate more, so we might as well try and do it as gracefully as possible. I don't think we don't do it that gracefully. Knowing what I know about the human race, we're unlikely to do it gracefully, but since we do have to do it anyway, let's try and be a little bit more graceful about it. Just a little more grace can make the difference between millions of lives lost or saved. So, all of this to say, giving up your truth. How does this require you to give up your truth? Well, in order to talk about truth, we need to talk about postmodernism, believe it or not. So, and I'll explain why in a second, but really, postmodernism has some great things to say about truth that are actually really relevant to everything that I'm just talking about and cooperation in general. So, postmodernism is an intellectual and artistic and aesthetic movement that arrived sometime in the 20th century. And it argues that there is no such thing as universal ideas about, well, like truth or beauty or progress is probably the one that's most relevant here. That all of these ideas, these beliefs that people, especially Europeans and Americans, sort of picked up in the period preceding the arrival of postmodernism, which is called the modern era, they're just products of some people having more power than others and sort of dictating, like, this is what progress is, this is what beauty is, this is what truth is, and that actually these ideas are empty. They're just a product of point of view and power relations. And from this this movement, this intellectual movement of postmodernism, it was picked up a lot on the left, the political left, and picked up by the academy. So professors in universities and colleges became a big part of their thinking and the way they started writing and thinking and talking about the world. And sort of it began to evolve into things that then sort of started to enter into the mainstream of society. Things like political correctness is a stepchild or grandchild, perhaps, of postmodernism. Identity politics is definitely descended from postmodernism, right? Because identity politics, you're saying that like, well, what you think is true, what you think we should be doing or whatever is really just because you are who you are. It's your class or your race or your gender or whatever. It's your identity that is defining what you think is valuable, and it's completely biased, right? So that's another thing. And the social justice movement, in a sense, you could say is related to that, although it's entirely possible to have a social justice movement without any postmodern sensibilities around it. But so as postmodernism has rightly so been criticized on a number of levels for being like generating a whole lot of nonsense, because if you sort of take every idea and every kind of meaningful thing and deconstruct it, right? Because deconstructing thing is a big pomo word, right? You take it apart into all its little pieces and then until there's like nothing there, right? It's very easy to deconstruct stuff. It's a lot harder to put things back together. So like a postmodern like interpretation of, say, the pyramids in Egypt, right? Well, if you sort of metaphorically speaking, take apart the pyramids block by block, and then at the end of the day, what do you have? You have like a bunch of rocks, right? So, the pyramids are actually just a pile of rocks. Well, yeah, maybe on a certain level, but you can see how these things get pretty ridiculous. So postmodernism has been responsible for a lot of silly shit. However, the fundamental tenet of postmodernism, which is that what you think is true, and now we're getting to the heart of this video, back to that title, giving up your truth. What you think is true is really just a product of your point of view and an accident of history. That idea is so important. It is the critical idea, a concept behind everything I'm saying in these videos, and I think it's the critical one for understanding and surviving and thriving in the era that we live in now. Never before in human history have there been so many different truths clamoring for attention, demanding that they be heard, right? I mean, just to take some super high level examples. For the last 500 years or so, European society, European culture, European people have kind of run the show on this planet. They've kind of pushed everyone around. They've told other countries and other peoples what to do. They've invaded them. They've ruled them. They've shoved them around, right? They're the bullies on the block, so to speak. Today, that era is sunsetting. It's ending. And new points of view, new truths, say in India or in China, are standing up and saying, no, actually, this is how I see the world. This is my point of view. This is my truth, right? So that's one example of how there's a whole new set of truths about the world and how it should be run and all of that stuff. And if all you can do is cling on to yours and you're going to get shoved off, right? So you have to be able to be postmodern about that. Another example, the last 10,000 years, the same thing has been going on with men and women. Now, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, and there's a lot of subtleties involved. But if you can think about it as, men telling women who they are, what their role is, what to do, what you can't do, and then in a relative blink of the eye, historically speaking, a couple hundred years or so, that has fallen apart, has changed all over the world, and is still changing. So once again, whole new set of points of view, of truths, standing up and saying, actually, that's not how I see the world. That I understand that that's sort of how you've seen the world and you take it for granted and that's your truth, but it turns out it's not universal. I actually see it completely differently. So once again, a postmodern point of view on that might be helpful. And that's sort of what I'm getting at here, which is that we are all postmodernists now. I'm certainly a postmodernist. I hope watching this video or reading the book or just thinking about the world around you will make you a little more pomo too. Because it's so essential, that understanding of the world around you, which is that there are all these other points of view, all these other truths. It's not like once you get it, you're done, you've done your work. It's like a kind of like constant reminder. It's like surfing or something, right? You've got to keep surfing this uncertainty. Now, having said all that, so let's get back to that question, giving up your truth. So now I seem to be saying, so you got to give up your truth. But I'm not so sure about that. Because the next thing I'm going to say, which basically completely contradicts everything I just said, sort of. And that is that at the same time that we all have to be aware that there are all these truths around us, and that ours is turns out it's only little t truth and not big T truth, right? It seems to maybe only applies to us. At the same time, I believe that there are universal truths, that there is stuff that we can find that can and should and will apply to everyone, and that do matter to everyone. Things like truth and progress and beauty, all the stuff that the postmodern era is trying to force us to give up. So it's a bit of a paradox, and there's a lot of paradoxes in the After Age. I talk about it, I bring it up over and over again in the book. You just got to live in the paradoxes, I think. At the same time that you need to accept this postmodern world that we live in, you also shouldn't be giving up on this modern or whatever, this search for universal ideas that we all can share. So it's about both letting go of your truth and then finding a new one. So instead of thinking of it as like letting go of a cliff and falling into the void of POMO kind of relativity, nothing means anything, think of it more like as if you're on a flying trapeze and you swing in and you let go and you do a couple cartwheels maybe in the air or something, and then you hopefully grab on to the person on the other trapeze. So it's making that leap, accepting that there are 8 billion different truths out there, and at the same time having faith, I guess, that there are things that we can share, and that a lot of them are probably the same old truths that we had before, just kind of reimagined, and that some aren't. And I don't know the difference. I'm just looking for them myself. But this is a multi-generational effort, and the book and the videos, what I'm telling you right now is my small contribution to that, and I hope you can make your own in your life. So yeah, so the next several videos are going to be about the individual. It's going to be building on what we're talking about here and the concept of the After Age in the previous videos, and talking more about specifically the individuals, how we as individuals can maybe change the way we think about the world around us to kind of fit into this new POMO world, I suppose, postmodern point of view I hope you'll watch those videos. Thank you for watching this one. That's it.